All right, so the first thing that I want to mention is that you absolutely don't have to have a tablet to do this. I am just using Procreate because I am. I feel like using Procreate to draw today. The other thing that I think is just funny that I was going to tell you is I went to grab an actual pen because I was prepping to tell you that you don't have to use Procreate. So I was trying to find a pen to start drawing. I don't know. It's my brain. It's fine. So I'm just going to pick a screen size. You guys can pick any canvas that you want to pick. But we're drawing from a realistic flower. So I'm going to try my hardest to kind of stand up and see exactly what the camera is seeing here. But the idea is that we are going to take the structure of the flower and interpret it on paper. And to do this, we can look at these tiny areas in the center, which we can just use mark making for and create either like little horseshoe marks, which let me find a good pen for this, or brush rather. Okay, so they can be, horseshoes, but really small. You could use actual circles. You could use, almost full circles, or you could even go into stippling, which is really beautiful. When it's complete, it takes a little more time. Some tricks before we get into this that I wanted to share was no matter what kind of mark making that you do, just remember that, okay, I'm going to do this quickly, but let's remember that you have this full form, but then you also can add depth. So if we look at this flower, where is the depth coming from? Well, it's pretty dark the whole way through, but let's deepen the center a little bit. All you do is you just overlap more of that same thing in that general area, and that's creating your depth. And you're going to see what I'm talking about as this flower gets, more into its form. Another thing that I really like to do is create some depth around the circumference of the circle, but I'm going to wait to do that until after I add my petals in. And that's just so that I can show you how it comes to life once we get to that point. So apparently I've gone with stippling and that's where we are. So I'll go from there. Just an FYI, you can use any brush if you're using Procreate. I'm using my own pack. It's the drawing ink pack. I'll link it below in case you're interested in it. I'm using Ink Scratch. All right. You could use a monoline. You could use, just any brush that you like to use. How about, okay? Now, from here, I'm going to look at these petals and I'm going to see how they have natural motion. So, when we're used to drawing flowers, from growing up, we're used to drawing them a bit like this, right? So this is kind of challenging that. We're also used to making things really perfect the whole way. So I don't want you guys to think about that. I want you to think about looking at the flower and seeing how you are able to take what you see and interpret it on paper. So I notice that some of these have a little bit of a twist to them. Some of them are a little bit longer. There's some overlap here. There's some line work in here to show movement. So I'm going to show you how to do all of that without having to worry too much about, figuring out structure. It's going to be an easy trick. So the first ones that I'm going to do, it's hard because I have to keep standing up to see what you guys can see. I got this. We got this together. All right, so I'm going to start kind of right here. And there's a trick that I want to show you. You're looking at the length here. So the length is a little bit, if I use this as a measuring tip, it's a little bit shorter than the whole base of the center. So if this is this size, then if I bring it up here and it's shorter than that tip, then I can come down a little bit, and that's where this is. It's a quick measuring tip. You don't have to be so precise. I'm never so precise, but that's just a trick. So these petals, they come up and out, and then they have this cute little tip right here. All right. This pen in particular, it's called Ink Scratch, and so it's a little bit, it really embraces those or showcases those imperfections, which is kind of my jam, so I'm all into it. Just an FYI, if you're wondering, okay, well, why isn't mine doing that? It's just brush settings. you can change your brush settings for any brush, or you can go in and snag this one. Again, if you're using a regular pen, you can create an effect like this just by lightening your grip or flicking. It's going to make it so the ends are, they come off thinner. Okay, so now my trick that is more important is to realize, I don't know if you guys have ever had the problem where you're going around the whole thing and then your petals keep getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. We're not going to let that happen because we're just going to jump to either quadrants, straight across, or triangle. I always work in odd numbers because, I don't want anything to ever look symmetrical when I'm doing flowers. So I'm going to jump to this one here. It's about the same length. So let me just tilt this to where it's supposed to be. That's the thing about Procreate is it's cheating. It's not cheating. Shh. It's the same as if I rotated my paper. Okay, so it's about here-ish. I'm not going to make this too perfect. I start pretty thin, and then I'm going to come around like this, where it goes out and then back in, and then I'll create that little tip. And I don't want to put too much emphasis on the tip just because I kind of want the petals to speak for themselves. And when there's so many of them, I don't know, you could define the tips if you really wanted to. All right, so now we are going to create the next one here. And this one is looking a little bit like it's folded. I'll show you that closer. Where it kind of comes up and folds a little bit. It's kind of hard to see, but I'll show you my trick around doing that one. Skinnier, first of all. So it's going to be skinnier. I'm going to create that tip here, but then I'm going to create a little fold. And so how do I do this? I have the edge that's thinner, but then the part that folds is I follow this line and then I come off of it and then curve and come back on it. It's very slight, but it's just enough to give us the illusion of a fold. I somehow got into quadrants, but that's all right. I'm not positioning right. And it's because I'm standing. It's so weird. Okay, no, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You guys are getting what I'm saying. All right, so from here, I'm going to move this, though, just for reference so that you guys see what I'm talking about otherwise. Whoops. There we go. There. Now you kind of see what I'm talking about otherwise. All right, so from here, oops, my fold went away. And I'm on eraser. Why? Oh, because I got white somehow. Okay, there we go. We're on track again. So from here, now I can start filling them because the lengths are correct. I'm going to place one right next to this because the one I made was a little bit short and I don't want to lose that length around. So that's where I can come in and place that before I start to go around, because I even had that problem with just one. So you're not alone. This is like a thing. Okay, so from here, I'm going to just fill them out the same way. So I could either just mock what I'm doing. Now this might look ridiculous to you, but we haven't put any detail in yet, so just bear with me. But see how imperfect I'm making these? Like, they are scratchy AF. But when we're finished here, it's going to look awesome. So bear with yourself and bear with me. All right, so I'm just going to start to fill them in. So I could just mock the same shape, or I can go based off of what I see on the flower itself, and then I can make it look, more similar to the actual flower. But what I do want to say is, remember that this is your interpretation of nature. Like, your drawing is not a photo. You're not out to, win an award for the most realistic illustration of all time. So I'm going to just fill this with the same types of petals, and I'm going to set this down so that I can actually sit down and do this, because I've been standing and that is really throwing me off. All right, so as one of the things I wanted to tell you is that as we start to build these up, try not to space them like too perfectly, because even though this particular flower is really, really symmetrical already, which, is an added benefit, nature is not perfect. And so, if we space these out exactly, then it's just, I don't know, I think it takes away from the characteristic a little bit. Now, I want to point out, I'm not erasing anything. So if you are drawing on paper, jump in with pen. Jump in with pen. It's the main thing that I tell people to do, because you have to figure out how to make it work. And that's the part that's really magical when you're bringing these to life. And that's the part that makes them look more realistic, is these imperfect areas. You don't have to get real sketchy with it either. You can draw main lines that represent that. And you can see in my other classes, especially botanical line drawing, on Skillshare, you'll see that's exactly how I approach it. It's just like simple line drawing. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to start to overlap them. So I'm going to draw a curve right here, and then I'm going to start here, act as though it is overlapping, or yeah, but the thing is, I want to hover the whole way to see where it's going to come out, because there's nothing worse than, having the illusion of something and then it's like coming out totally in the wrong place and doesn't look like it lines up or like it's realistic at all. So I'm basically just going to be putting in some overlap. They're not going to mirror each other exactly. They're not going to be the same length. So I'll have this one stop about right here, right? And then this next one, I'm going to leave a gap and have it come out kind of like that. And then maybe I'll leave this gap here, because the more that you fill and fill and fill and fill, the more it's going to start to look like a perfect circle, and we don't want that. Because it just, if that's your thing, cool. But that's just not realistic in nature. So allow yourself the freedom to experiment and make this process more organic feeling, right? Okay, so I'm basically just doing the same thing that we've already talked about. I'm overlapping, I'm drawing new petals in, I'm sticking to the sides so that I can put in shorter and longer, leaving some natural gaps. I'll have an overlap pretty close to this one so that there's a natural gap here, and then maybe right here. See, I'm not putting a lot of effort into it, but you can already see it's really coming together. All right, so that's basically done. I'm pretty happy with this. I like that it's uneven. I might actually throw one a little bit longer just back here so that it's not too short overall on that side, but just know when to stop because if you keep going, it's gonna be a hot mess. All right, so now I'm gonna look for opportunities of bend. So see how this one doesn't curve like this? It's like more inward. I'm gonna take this and create a fold out of it. So see how that creates a fold? And I do it in the same way. So let's do it to maybe the bottom part here. I follow the line and I come off of it, and then I come back in and meet it. So it's not like a harsh connection. It's following the line, coming off of it, and going back in softly. And that's gonna create your little curves and whatnot. Okay, so from here, we are going to look at detail on the flower itself. So you can see that there are little lines that make up movement within the petals. And to create that, I am going to do the same trick that I showed you if I had a regular pen, which is to set the pen down and flick it upwards, and that's going to make it thicker at the bottom and thinner at the top, so it looks like kind of more of an organic line. And I'm going to do that following the curve, the natural curve of the petal. So if I'm closer to, let's go with this one because it's large. If I'm closer to the left side, I'm going to make those lines curve to the left. If I'm close to the right side, I'm going to have them curve to the right. Some will be thicker, some will be thinner, some will be longer, some will be shorter. What I don't want to do is space them out evenly, and I don't want to make them all vertical. So go with the natural flow of the petal, and that's it. I'm not going to overdo it. That is perfect, okay? Because the more that you do it, you can overwork them, and you don't want to do that. Okay, so here I've got this area that's kind of messed up, but overall you're not going to really tell once everything is said and done. You can also skip some. I mean, you don't have to fill them out on every single one, or you could add just one line one of the things that I wanted to share with you is, as you're creating these lines, to add depth to that edge that I was talking about, one of the things that I love to do is bring my lines close to the center and up and out. In this case, we have to, because that's where the connection is, but the more that we overlap down here, so see, if I just have short lines down here, that's going to create that depth, and it's not going to come all the way up, but look at the difference between this petal and this petal. This one has like way more assumed depth toward the side. Now, what I was going to show you about the center was that if I added additional areas of overlap, and I had, you know, the areas right here that have more depth in my petals. Now, if I get this smaller, it looks like this petal is almost being tucked into the side. It looks like it's grabbing it versus being right next to it. These are both pretty light, but if I was to really emphasize, you know, the bottom of the petal right here, doing these tiny, tiny line marks, by the way, notice that they're still staggered in height, but they're not coming all the way up. So they're not distracting from the whole petal. They are just pushing that depth in where the connection is. So just like a little trick as far as mark making and adding depth goes. So you can do that, or you don't have to, but it's one of my favorite features of adding, you know, interest to petals. So see how it's like really coming to life now? So I'm just going to continue doing that along the edges. I mean, you can see how quickly I'm working. This is how I do it in real time. I don't spend a whole lot of time perfecting any of this. And that is just because I want it to feel organic. I want the experience to feel organic. I'm drawing nature. I'm interpreting it in my own way. I'm not overthinking anything. I'm not allowing my imperfections to throw me off. In fact, I'm embracing them and preferring them, because that's what's kind of bringing this thing to life. So see how any connection that I had, this one's a little dark, any connection that I had that might have looked like a floater now totally looks like an organic connection. So you could do this again with, like, you know, if your center was like a bunch of horseshoes, how would you do that? You would just layer one of the parts, and then you can see the rest of the area would look sparser. So if you make that smaller, you see how that depth is added. So that's how you would go about doing that. I'm going to take this away. Okay. Oops. So flick off. That one is not going the same direction. If you do that and it's pen, no big deal. I do that all the time when I draw real flowers, but like, just see it and then don't do it again. But the thing is, when you have this many petals and this many lines, chances of, you know, that standing out is very small. Another thing is I do turn my paper or my canvas on Procreate as I'm creating petals, and that's just because of the natural way that our our wrist wants to go when we're doing like a flicking motion, and I don't want to hinder that by trying to force my hand to do something it doesn't want to do. Okay, so from here, we basically have that done. I mean, this part is a little messed up with the fold, but the nice thing is underneath flowers, petals might be darker, they might be a different color, so I'm going to throw the darkness and depth underneath all of my folds, and that way it might look a little more intentional. If you find that that is throwing off the balance a little bit, I'm going kind of crazy, then add it in a few places. Just remember the rule of symmetry, which is don't make it symmetrical. That's the rule. Don't do it. So if you have some darker areas, just pick and choose where you want those to go, and maybe enhance the center areas. Of accompanying, of petals that are near that space. And then it will balance it pretty well. But that's basically it. And then from there, I mean, this is face up toward us, so I wouldn't really have to do anything else if I didn't want to. And honestly, if I was to like add a stem and add all the leaves and stuff, it would start to look more like sunflower style, which this is not. And so I want to really honor that. That's just my creative choice though. But then I have this awesome little flower illustration that I can incorporate as its own or any other way. So I hope that was really helpful. I do have a ton of classes and lessons on botanical line drawing, including my book, Botanical Line Drawing. So be sure to grab that. Drawing flowers is so much fun. You can do it in doodle ways. You can do it in realistic ways. It's a very rewarding process.